All right, Math 2, Unit 6, notes for area. So here are our area formulas. If you need to, you can pause the video and copy those down, and then I'm going to talk about them for a second. All right, I'll first talk about the circle area formula. Area equals pi r squared. We want to remember that the radius is half of the diameter. Sometimes in these problems, they'll give you the diameter, and they ask for the area, and you'll have to first convert it to the radius and then plug in. The parallelogram, I'll talk about it next. Parallelograms are four-sided figures where the opposite sides are parallel. In the family of parallelograms, you've got rectangles, you've got squares, you've got rhombuses, and the area is base times height. That's probably one of those formulas that you've been doing forever. Really, our triangle and our trapezoid formulas are, in my mind, based off of the parallelogram. So I'll look at the trapezoid next. The trapezoid area formula, and there's two ways to write it, and I like the top way more. I like this way because this statement here means average the bases and then times the height. And I like thinking of it that way because if you take your trapezoid, and normally our standard trapezoid looks like this, and if you were to smash it between those things there, it would turn it into a rectangle. If you pushed really, really hard, you'd get something a little bit more like this, right? So what we do in that picture, or in my mind at least, we smash it together and it ends up averaging the bases. The bases end up becoming the same, and it really turns into a rectangle, and then you could say the area is base times height, right? So it's kind of based off of that rectangle formula, or the parallelogram formula. Triangles are the same way. If you take any parallelogram, so we'll take one that looks like this, and you cut it in half, you get a triangle. So that's the way that I think about this. It's 1/2 the rectangle formula, or 1/2 the parallelogram formula, 1/2 base times height. So that's kind of how it helps me remember it. All right, let's look at number 2. Number 2, find the area of each. So number 2, this is a parallelogram. It's also a rectangle and a square. And our area formula is base times height. So in this case, it's going to be 2.1 times 2.1, which will give me something, 4 point something. 2.1 times 2.1 is 4.41. 4.41. And area, whenever we go to our units, area is always listed as squared, so we're going to have meters squared. There we are. Number 3, this shape is a rectangle. It's also a parallelogram, so our area is base times height. It doesn't matter which one you decide is your base and which one's your height, but we're going to have to use the 7.5 and the 11. So I'm going to say 7.5 times 11, and that gives me 82.5. And whenever I talk about my units, I'm going to have feet, and area is always squared. So there's those. All right, number 4. This shape is a triangle, so area is 1/2 base times height. Something that's slightly confusing about triangles and slightly confusing about this problem is that there are 3 numbers given here, but we only need 2, so we need to figure out what numbers are we going to use. One of the ways that I always look for is I find my right angle. Okay? In a triangle or in any shape, your height and your base will meet at a right angle. Okay? So this is going to be our base, and this is going to be our height. Right? We kind of have to turn our paper on the side, and we can kind of see that is our bottom, and then that's our top, or our base and our height. So the 7 here is just extra information that we do not need. So whenever we go to plug into our formula, we have 1/2 the base, which is 12, times the height, which is 5.8. This is the same thing as 6 times 5.8, which whenever I type that in, I get 34.8. And we're talking about meters, and they are squared. All right. Number 5. Now there's all kinds of numbers listed here. This is what is this? This is a parallelogram. So our area is base times height. We know that it's a parallelogram, one, because it looks like one, but that's not really good enough for us because the opposite sides are congruent, or they are equal. All right. In a parallelogram, one of the side theorems to say whether something is a parallelogram or not is that if the opposite sides are equal, then it has to be a parallelogram. Kind of like how a rectangle, the opposite sides are equal. So again, number 5, just like in number 4, we want to orient ourselves about that right angle. So in this one over here, in the triangle, we looked at that right angle. Here we're going to look at the right angle, and we're going to pick out our base and our height. Remember, our base and our height have to meet at a right angle. So we're going to call, we'll call this guy our base, and we'll call this guy our height. So we're going to have, what is this going to be? 10.6 times 3.6. Whenever we multiply those together, we get 38.16. And we're talking about centimeters, and they are squared because we're talking about area. One way to explain why it's centimeters squared is to say, well, really we have 10.6 centimeters, and we have 3.6 centimeters. And if we had centimeters times centimeters, just like if we had x times x, we'd have x squared, right? So this time we have 38.16 and then centimeters squared. Same idea. It works kind of like how a variable would work. All right. On to number 6.
Teacher, pardon the interruption. Mr. Selfman, will you please call 1603? Mr. Selfman, please call 1603.
All right, number 6. We're talking about a trapezoid here, and we can see that it's a trapezoid because, well, for one, it looks like one. And so we're going to talk about the bases. The bases always have to have the right angle, right? So we orient ourselves about that right angle. We can see that the 3 is going to be our height. Let's go ahead and write our area formula. Area equals base 1 plus base 2 over 2 times the height. So our bases are going to both meet at a right angle, and in this one it's going to be this is our base, this is our base. The 3.9 there does not matter at all. And whenever we go to plug this in, we don't care which one's base 1 and base 2. You can just pick which one you want in the different spots. So we have 8.9 plus 2.7 divided by 2 times our height, which is 3. Now, if you want to type this in the calculator quickly, I would type it in this way. You would say 0.5, or just 0.5, times, with a parenthesis, 8.9 plus 2.7, and then times 3 at the end. So I'm going to type that in. So I'm going to say 0.5, parenthesis, 8.9 plus 2.7, parenthesis, times 3. And I got 17.4. And we're talking about inches, and they are squared. Now the reason that I changed it over here is because if you start here and you type in the 8.9 plus 2.7 and then you press the divided button, the 2 would only divide the 2.7. We need these parentheses to let our calculator know that we want the thing to add together first. So anytime you type it in the calculator like this, you're going to need to have parentheses in there. All right, number 7. This is another trapezoid. We can see our height is going to be right here, and our bases are right there and right there. And we don't really care about that 5.4. So let me write our formula down. Area equals base 1 plus base 2 over 2 times the height. So we're going to have 2.9 plus 7.9 over 2 times 3.6. Now this time I'm going to type it a little bit differently in my calculator. I'm going to type in 2.9 plus 7.9, and I'm going to put them in parentheses. So I'm going to say parenthesis 2.9 plus 7.9, close parenthesis, divided by 2 times 3.6. And I got 19.44. We're talking about yards, and they are squared. All right. So I just showed you two different ways we can type it in the calculator. You can either change it over to the 0.5 there, or you can leave it in the parentheses and use the fraction. I don't care which one you do, but you need to make sure that you use the parentheses around the bases. The bases need to be listed in parentheses. We have the parentheses over here in yellow, and we have the parentheses over here in yellow. All right. Number 8, find the area of each. Use your calculator's value of pi. That means press the button on your calculator that has the pi. And then round your answer to the nearest tenth. The nearest tenth is 1 decimal. So our area formula is pi r squared. So we're going to plug in here pi 6 squared, which is the same thing as 36 pi. So I'm going to type that in my calculator. I'm going to say 36 times, now I need to remember where the pi button is. On my calculator, it's kind of in the upper left region. So 36 times pi gives me 113 point. I'm just going to write a bunch of them down, 0.97. And whenever I round to the nearest tenth, I'm going to have 113.1 because I rounded to 1 decimal point. My units are meters and area is squared. All right. Number 9. They gave us the diameter. It goes all the way across the circle. So for starters, we're going to have to say, well, 22.8 divided by 2 is 11.4. That is our radius. And now that we have our radius, we can plug into our formula. We're going to have area equals pi times 11.4 squared. And I'm just going to type that whole thing in my calculator. I'm going to say pi times 11.4 squared. And I'm just going to write down a bunch of the decimals. 408 point, I'm just going to say 281. Now, whenever I go to round, I'm going to round to that first decimal point. So 408 point, well, the 8 rounds it up to a 3. My units are yards, and they are squared. So there we are, that's our answer there. All right. Number 10 to number 11, we're going to find the missing measurement, and we're going to round our answer to the nearest tenth. So here they give us the area, and they gave us a missing side length. Now what I like to do is anytime they have these question marks here, I'm just going to make it an X. I'm going to make it an X on both those problems. I don't like dealing with question marks. I'd rather it be an X. So we're going to have to write down the area formula here for this triangle. Here's our height, and our base meets at a right angle. So area is 1/2 base times height. So I'm going to plug in everything I know. I know the area is 19.1, is 1/2, the base is x, and the height is 5.3. And now we just have to solve. So for starters, I'm going to do 1/2 times 5.3, so 0.5 times 5.3 gave me 2.65x. Now to finish solving, I'm going to divide by 2.65. And I say, well, what is 19.1 divided by 2.65? And I got x equals 7.2. And we're talking about meters. So that is the base of our triangle. All right, and number 11, we're going to deal with it very similarly. This is a rectangle, so our area is base times height. So we could say 11.6 is, we'll say 3.4 times x. We divide both sides by 3.4, and I get 11.6 divided by 3.4 gives me 3.4 is x. So to write my answer, I need to have units. So I'll say 3.4 yards. Now, I don't know if I talked about this, but in numbers 10 and 11 here, our units were plain old meters and plain old yards, not squared. And the reasoning for that is that we were finding a side length. We weren't finding the area, we were finding the side length in these last problems. So make sure that you read what the problem is telling you to do. And then you need to also consider, would the units be in regular units or units squared? All right.